I thought my upgrade was just a better seat, until the flight attendant's smile made me realize some journeys change more than your destination. The airport was buzzing that night, a restless hum of rolling suitcases, half-finished phone calls, and announcements echoing across polished floors. I'd been traveling enough lately to know the rhythm of it all, yet this flight felt different even before I boarded. Maybe it was the late hour, or maybe it was the way my chest carried a quiet anticipation I couldn't name. When I finally stepped onto the aircraft, the cabin felt calmer than the terminal outside. The lights were dimmed to a soft glow, the kind that blurs the edges of strangers' faces and makes the world feel smaller, more private. I was still adjusting the strap of my bag when I heard her voice for the first time. "Good evening, sir. Welcome aboard." I looked up, and there she was. The flight attendant. She wasn't what I expected. Her presence had a kind of elegance that didn't announce itself loudly, but demanded to be noticed all the same. Early 40s, with dark eyes that seemed to study more than just my boarding pass, and a smile that carried warmth but also restraint, like she was guarding more than she was giving. Her uniform was immaculate, her posture straight, but there was something in the way she leaned ever so slightly toward me that unsettled me. I handed her my ticket. She glanced at it, then at me, and a faint curve lifted her lips. "It looks like you've been upgraded." Her tone was smooth, professional, yet something lingered in the pause between words, as if she enjoyed watching me process the surprise. "Upgraded?" I echoed, trying not to sound as tired as I felt. She nodded, stepping aside so I could pass. "Yes. Row 2. A little more room, a little more comfort." Then, with a softer note that didn't quite match the usual script, she added, "Your seat isn't the only upgrade tonight." The line caught me off guard. It could have been nothing, just a playful remark lost in the endless rehearsals of service. But her eyes didn't move from mine, not right away. They lingered, steady, curious, long enough for me to know that the words weren't random. As I made my way down the narrow aisle toward the front of the cabin, I could still feel her gaze on my back. The seat itself was larger, the kind that reclined deeper than economy ever could, but the real comfort I noticed wasn't the cushion beneath me, it was the warmth of her presence still hanging in the air. And for reasons I couldn't explain, I realized I was already looking forward to the next time she'd stop by my seat. The upgraded seat felt more spacious, but I wasn't relaxed. Not really. My body leaned back, but my mind replayed the moment at the boarding door, the way her eyes had caught mine like a thread pulling tight. I tried to distract myself, flipping through the safety card, adjusting the headrest, pretending the quiet hum of the engines was enough to steady me. But it wasn't. From where I sat in row 2, I could see her moving up and down the aisle, her steps measured, precise, the click of her low heels softened by the carpet. Every gesture she made had the polish of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before, adjusting a passenger's blanket, leaning just enough to set down a glass, smoothing her skirt before walking away. Yet, underneath the practiced routine, there was something undeniably personal. Something she didn't give to everyone. I noticed the way her fingers trailed along the top of my seat as she passed, a touch so light it might have been accidental, but too deliberate to ignore. I shifted slightly, testing the moment, and when I lifted my head, she was already watching me. Our eyes met. It should have been no more than a glance, the kind you exchange politely before looking away. But she didn't look away. Not immediately. Her gaze stayed, warm yet steady, as if she was silently daring me not to notice her. There was no smile this time, no words, just that pause, that unbroken line between us in the dim cabin light. My chest tightened, a flicker of heat running through me that had nothing to do with the recycled air. She broke the silence first, turning to adjust a tray table 2 rows behind me. But the moment lingered like perfume after someone leaves a room. I found myself studying her movements, the neat bun of her hair that had let a few strands slip free, the delicate way she adjusted her cuff, the way her voice carried low when she asked passengers if they needed anything. I wasn't supposed to notice these things, yet I couldn't stop. And when she circled back toward the front, her eyes caught mine again, just briefly, as if acknowledging the fact that I was watching. I sat back, trying to mask the restless energy stirring in me. She was older, confident, practiced in her world. And me? Just a traveler in the quiet glow of an upgraded seat. But in that simple exchange, an extra second of eye contact, I felt the first spark of something neither of us had named. And it was only the beginning. Hours passed in the quiet rhythm of the flight. Most of the cabin had surrendered to sleep, their heads tilted at odd angles, blankets pulled to their chins. The lights were lowered to a hush, only thin strips of reading lamps glowing like distant stars. Outside the window, the sky was ink black, the curve of the earth faintly visible under the moonlight. I should have been asleep too, but my body resisted. My thoughts kept circling back to her, the flight attendant with eyes that seemed to hold questions she hadn't asked aloud. Every so often, I caught a glimpse of her moving silently down the aisle, her figure outlined by the silver wash of the overhead lights. Each time, I felt a subtle shift inside me, like my heart was leaning forward before my body did. It was sometime after midnight when she stopped beside me again. Her voice was barely above a whisper, careful not to disturb the other passengers. "Are you comfortable?" I looked up, and there she was, leaning slightly closer than she needed to, one hand resting on the seat in front of mine, the other smoothing the edge of her uniform skirt. The faint scent of her perfume, something floral laced with warmth, drifted in the air between us. "Yes," I said, though my pulse betrayed me. "More than comfortable." She tilted her head, her lips curving in the faintest smile, as if she understood the weight behind my words. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't awkward, it was deliberate, charged, like we were both listening for something that couldn't be heard. Finally, she broke it. "You travel often?" I nodded. "Enough that airports all blur together. But tonight, feels different." I caught myself, wondering if I'd said too much. Her eyes softened, and she lowered her voice. "Different how?" The question lingered, almost daring me to be honest. I looked at her, really looked, at the way her hair had loosened slightly from its neat bun, at the faint shadow beneath her eyes that spoke of long hours and restless nights. She was flawless in her presentation, but human in the small cracks that showed through. "Because most flights feel lonely," I admitted quietly. "But not this one." Her gaze flickered, and for the first time I saw something in her slip past the polished surface, vulnerability. She drew in a breath and exhaled slowly, her hand brushing the edge of my armrest, close enough to feel the heat of her skin. "You're not wrong," she said, her voice carrying a wistful note. "People think this job is glamorous. They don't see the silence waiting at the end of every flight." Her honesty caught me off guard. It was rare, the kind of confession that doesn't belong in small talk at 30,000 feet. But I understood. And I think she saw it in my face, that I wasn't judging, that I was listening. In that quiet exchange, between the hum of the engines and the glow of the moon, something shifted. We were no longer just a flight attendant and a passenger. We were two people who had admitted, in the smallest way, that the night didn't have to feel so lonely. The cabin had fallen into its deepest hush. Most of the passengers were cocooned in sleep, their faces lit faintly by the soft glow of the seatbelt signs. The hum of the engines became a kind of heartbeat, steady, unbroken, lulling. It was in this stillness that she appeared again, moving gracefully down the aisle with a tray in her hands. She stopped at my row, her voice low, warm enough to feel like it was meant only for me. "Would you like a hot towel?" I nodded, though the words caught in my throat. She leaned closer, offering the folded cloth between her fingers. And then it happened, our hands touched. At first, it was nothing more than the brush of skin, the kind of incidental contact that could be explained away. But in that instant, her fingers lingered, not long, not obvious, but just enough. I felt the curl of her hand against mine, subtle, deliberate. The warmth of her touch seeped into my palm, sending a quiet shiver up my arm. I looked up at her. Her face was calm, her expression carefully composed, but her eyes betrayed her. There was a flicker there, a softness that revealed she felt it too. She didn't pull away immediately. And when she did, it was slow, as if part of her didn't want to. I pressed the towel to my hands, but its heat was nothing compared to the memory of her touch still burning against my skin. My pulse quickened, and for a moment I forgot the other passengers, forgot the miles of sky outside the window. There was only her, standing close, her silhouette framed in the dim glow of the overhead light. "Everything all right?" she asked quietly, as though testing the air between us. "Yes," I managed. My voice was steadier than I felt. Her lips curved faintly, the barest suggestion of a smile, before she turned to move down the aisle. But the air she left behind was charged, alive with something unspoken. I watched her go, the neat lines of her uniform, the way her hair caught the faintest glint of light. It was such a small moment, just hands touching, but it carried more weight than any words we'd exchanged. In that brief contact, I felt the boundary between professionalism and something else begin to blur. And deep down, I knew this was no accident. Restlessness tugged at me. No matter how many times I closed my eyes, I couldn't sleep. The warmth of her touch, the weight of her lingering glance, it had settled into me like a secret I couldn't shake. Finally, I unbuckled my seatbelt and rose, careful not to disturb the quiet passengers around me. The aisle felt narrower than ever as I made my way toward the back of the plane, guided by the faint glow spilling from the galley. She was there. Leaning against the counter, arms crossed lightly over her chest, she seemed lost in thought. Her shoulders, usually held in perfect posture, had softened, and her gaze was far away, fixed on nothing in particular. For a moment I just stood there, watching her, not as a passenger observing a flight attendant, but as a man seeing a woman who, for all her elegance, carried her own solitude. She noticed me, and a small, almost shy smile tugged at her lips. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, her voice quieter now, stripped of the rehearsed cadence she used with the others. I shook my head. "Not tonight." Something flickered in her eyes, like she understood more than I'd said. She exhaled softly and glanced down, as if debating whether to speak. Then, after a pause, she looked back at me. "It's strange," she began, her voice laced with honesty. "From the outside, this job looks like freedom, flying across the world, meeting people every day. But most of the time, it feels lonely." Her words settled heavily between us, not rehearsed, not part of the uniform she wore. I felt the vulnerability in them, and it moved me more than I expected. "I believe you," I said quietly. "You spend your nights above the clouds, but who really sees you up here?" Her lips parted slightly, and for a heartbeat she didn't answer. Instead, she studied me, searching, weighing, maybe even hoping. When she finally spoke, her tone carried a truth she seemed almost afraid to admit. "I noticed you when you boarded. You were calm, different from the others. Not distracted, not impatient. You looked present. And I can't remember the last time I wanted someone to notice me back." The confession hung in the hum of the engines. My chest tightened, not from surprise, but from the rawness of her words. She wasn't the untouchable professional anymore. She was simply a woman, standing under harsh fluorescent lights, letting me see the cracks in her armor. And in that moment, I realized I didn't want to look away. The plane had settled into its quiet rhythm again. I returned to my seat, but my mind lingered in the galley, her words echoing, her honesty still wrapped around me like a thread I couldn't untangle. I kept replaying the way her eyes softened when she spoke, the way her voice had slipped past the script into something raw. I thought maybe that would be the night's high point, the secret moment we'd both carry alone. But fate had other plans. The first tremor of turbulence came suddenly, a shudder that rippled through the cabin and rattled the overhead bins. Passengers stirred, a few gasps filling the air. My own seatbelt was fastened, but before I could even steady myself, she was there, emerging from the aisle, moving with instinctive grace despite the jolt of the aircraft. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice low but urgent. I nodded, but then the plane dipped again, sharper this time, enough to make her stagger. Without thinking, she reached out, and her hand landed firmly on my shoulder. Her palm pressed through the thin fabric of my shirt, warm and grounding. At first it seemed accidental, just her way of keeping balance. But when the shaking subsided, she didn't remove it. Her hand stayed, her fingers curling slightly against me, as though she'd chosen not to let go. I looked up at her. The dim light from the overhead panel cast shadows across her face, softening the lines of discipline, revealing something gentler, almost fragile. Our eyes locked, and in that suspended silence, it felt like the world had narrowed to just the two of us, the hum of engines, the sleeping passengers, all of it fading to nothing. Her breathing was steady, but her hand betrayed her, trembling faintly where it rested against me. And instead of pulling away, she leaned closer, the scent of jasmine brushing the air between us. I felt her presence like a quiet current, steadying, comforting, yet charged with something neither of us dared name. No words passed between us. None were needed. That single touch said more than any confession could. It spoke of trust, of longing, of boundaries neither of us had expected to cross. When the turbulence faded and the plane leveled again, she didn't retreat immediately. She lingered, her hand sliding away with reluctant grace, her eyes holding mine until the last second. And in that moment, I understood, what we were building wasn't just chance. It was choice. The night faded slowly into morning as the plane descended. Thin lines of pink and gold stretched across the horizon, spilling through the oval windows and washing the cabin in a hushed glow. One by one, passengers stirred awake, blinking into the new day, adjusting seatbelts, preparing for arrival. But for me, the flight wasn't just ending, it was reaching its quiet climax. I sat in my upgraded seat, watching her move through the cabin with practiced calm, greeting sleepy smiles, checking on details that mattered less now than they had hours ago. To anyone else, she was the same polished professional she had been since boarding. But I had seen behind that layer, the loneliness, the softness, the vulnerability she had trusted me with. And that changed everything. When she reached my row, she didn't speak at first. Instead, she crouched slightly so her face was level with mine, her hand brushing the armrest as if to anchor herself. Dawn light touched her features, softening the fatigue, illuminating the curve of her lips. She leaned just close enough that her words were only for me. "Did you get any rest at all?" she asked, her voice low, carrying a warmth I'd grown addicted to in such a short time. I smiled faintly. "Not really. Some flights aren't meant for sleep." Her eyes held mine for a beat longer than necessary, and something flickered there, an acknowledgement that she felt the same. She reached out then, her fingers grazing the back of my hand. The touch was featherlight, as if she wasn't sure how far she could go. But when I didn't pull away, her fingers lingered, pressing softly, a final echo of all the unspoken things we'd shared in the night above the clouds. "You know," she whispered, the corners of her mouth lifting ever so slightly, "your seat wasn't the only upgrade tonight." The words struck deep, not because of their playfulness, but because of the truth beneath them. This wasn't just about a bigger seat or extra legroom. It was about connection, the kind that happens rarely, unexpectedly, and leaves a mark long after the flight is over. For a moment, I wanted to ask what would happen next. Would we see each other again? Would this fragile thread hold once the doors opened and the real world came rushing back in? But I didn't. Some questions don't need answers in the moment. Some are better left suspended, alive with possibility. The plane touched down with a gentle thud, the engines roaring before easing into silence. Passengers busied themselves with gathering bags, stretching stiff arms, resuming their lives. But I stayed still, memorizing the weight of her hand, the quiet steadiness in her eyes. When it was time to go, she stepped aside, letting others disembark. As I passed her, she didn't offer the scripted farewell she gave to everyone else. Instead, she leaned just slightly closer, her lips brushing the air between us. "Safe travels," she murmured, her voice layered with something far more personal. And then I walked down the jet bridge into the morning light, carrying no luggage heavier than before, but holding something infinitely more valuable. The memory of a night where two strangers met above the clouds, and discovered that sometimes, the smallest touches can feel like an upgrade to the soul.